Alright, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Magandang umaga Pilipinas at good evening America. Ako po ang inyong lingkod, Louis John Sanchez, LJ po, kasapi ng lupon ng Unyon ng mga Manunulat sa Pilipinas at tagapagpadaloy ng ating palatuntunan. Palugod po namin kayong tinatanggap sa ika-11 Adrian E. Cristóbal Lecture. Ang seryeng ito ay inihahandog ng pamilya ng tagapangulong tagapagtatag ng Unyon ng mga Manunulat sa Pilipinas na si Adrian E. Cristobal, katuwang siyempre ang UMPIL. Napapanood po ninyo kami sa Facebook page ng UMPIL at maging sa mga pahina ng ating streaming partners na marapat lamang banggitin at pasalamatan. Una po ang panitikan.com.ph ng University of the Philippines Likhan Institute of Creative Writing. Maraming salamat po kina Dr. Rolando Tolentino at Dr. Vladimir Gonzalez. Sa Savage Mind Bookshop sa Lungsod Naga, salamat po Ginoong Christian Sendon Cordero. Sa Mount Cloud Bookshop sa Lungsod Baguio, salamat po Binibining Feliz Perez. Sa Squeeze.ph, salamat po sa punong patnugot na si Wilmore Pakay. At sa ating palagiang katuwang na Linangan sa Imahen, Retorika at Anyo, Lira, Librong Lira at Sawikaan Filipinas Institute of Translation. Katuwang din natin ngayong umaga ang Anvil Publishing na tagapaglathala ng mga aklat ng ating putihing tagapanayam. At marahil kailangang ipabatid na mayroon tayong book promo ngayong umaga. 5 o 5, no? 50 aklat ni Ninochka Rosca ang ipamimigay sa 5 o 5 maswerteng participant ng ating Adrian E. Cristóbal Lecture. 5 ang tatanggap mula sa ating Facebook streaming. Maaari po kayong bumati, magkomentaryo at magtanong at maaari kayong maging isa sa tatanggap ng 5 o 5. 5 aklat ni Ninotchka Rosca. So, bati, komentaryo, tanong sa ibaba lamang po ng ating streaming. Huwag na natin itong masyadong patagilin at ibig ko pong tawagin ang katuwang na tagapangulo ng UMPIL, ang kwentista at mananaysay sa Ingles na si Susan Lara para sa ating bating pantanggap. Ma'am Sue, magandang umaga.
Magandang umaga, Louis John, at maraming salamat. Maligayang bati sa lahat. Good morning, Philippines. Good evening, New York. I am Susan Lara, Vice Chair of UMPIL. I am delighted to welcome all of you to the 2021 Adrian E. Cristóbal Lecture, an annual lecture series established by the Cristobal family in collaboration with the Union ng mga Manunulat sa Pilipinas or the Writers Union of the Philippines to honor the intellectual legacy of the late Adrian E. Cristóbal, former UMPIL chairman whose birthday falls today, February 20. Unlike in previous years when we gathered physically in one venue to hear our lecturers, the pandemic has made it necessary for us to hold this year's episode online. Welcome to our viewers from various parts of the country and the world who are watching through our Facebook page and through the pages of our partners. This year, we are honored to have acclaimed and prize-winning novelist Miss Ninotchka Rosca, who will be speaking to us from New York on the topic, The Infinity Mirror, Seeing/Not Seeing Ourselves. Thank you all for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of the program. Maraming salamat po.
Okay, ulitin ko ulit. Nakalimutan kong i-unmute ang aking sarili. So, sabi ko kanina, maraming salamat, Ma'am Sue. Nagmumula ho kami sa iba't ibang panig ng Metro Manila, no? At syempre kaugnay natin, no, sa Amerika si Binibining Ninotchka Rosca. Marahil ay ibig pa nating makilala ang siyang pinagpangalanan ng serye ng mga lekturang ito na sinimulan noong 2011. Narito po ang isang video, isang pagpubugay sa ating tagapangulong tagapagtatag na nabanggit nga kanina ni Ma'am Sue ay nagdiriwang na ngayon ng kanyang kaarawan. So, panoorin po natin ito.
For more than 50 years, the late Adrian E. Cristobal lived a public intellectual life, literature, fictionist, playwright, essayist, satirist, and newspaper columnist. His historical and satirical plays and essays, and later newspaper columns, used the tools of the mind to break down history, manners, and public policy. With both substance and style, his writing aspired towards what Sartre called that of the moral conscience of their age. By nature and purpose, his writing sought to restore the value of intelligence for the modern but ordinary reader who, by what he or she consumes in most media, has been thoroughly deprived of. It is in his honor and memory, and in homage to the public intellectual, that the Cristobal family and the Union ng mga Manunulat sa Pilipinas jointly initiate the Adrian E. Cristóbal Lecture series. As writers or public intellectuals, the world that we don't always know likes to hear from us. We need to be careful about what we say to it, the great audience, though it be invisible and deaf. We should always assume that someone may be listening.
Ayun, naku, ang gaganda ng mga larawang binahagi sa atin ng pamilya ng ating tagapangulong tagapagtatag na si Adrian E. Cristobal. Ang voice over po niya no ay ang kanyang anak na si Binibining Silina Cristobal na makakasama po natin mamaya at kasapi rin ng lupon ng Unyon ng mga Manunulat sa Pilipinas, no? Magandang ipakilala muli si Adrian, no, sa kasalukuyang henerasyon, no, dahil medyo matagal-tagal na nung siya pumanaw at personally ako po ay natutuwa dahil nakatrabaho ko po si Ginoong Cristobal sa Philippines Graphic Magazine, no, noong mga huling taon niya, no, huling taon ng kanyang buhay, no, at isang karangalan sa totoo lamang ho, no, ang ma-edit, no, mapapula, mapadugo ni Ginoong Cristobal, no, isa pong napakahusay, no, na manunulat at editor, no, na isa sa mga pinakamahusay na manunulat at editor na nakilala ko. So, ngayon po ay ipakikilala naman natin, no, ang serye mismo at ibig ko pong tawagin ng isa pa pong anak ni Ginoong Cristobal, ang palagian po natin kasama dito sa Adrian Cristobal Lectures, ang kagalang-galang po na si Secretary Adrian Cristobal Jr. Good morning, Che.
Good morning. Magandang umaga, LJ. Salamat. Hello to everyone. here in the Philippines and the US and elsewhere. Welcome to the Adrian E. Cristobal Lecture Series. A few years after our father Adrian passed away in December 22, 2007, we, his family, felt the need to organize an annual activity where relatives and friends, writers and journalists, students and teachers, and opinion shapers and policymakers can get together once a year. It would be an occasion for sharing and exchanging ideas about the matters that affect our lives. More important, this activity should provide a venue for and give recognition to people engaged in the public discourse on the issues of our time. Of course, we also wanted to find a way to keep Adrian's memory alive and his contribution to Philippine literature and journalism. Well, I say that hesitantly because I'm not sure that this is something he would approve of. He would probably just frown and scowl. Just get on with it, he would say. So that's how this AEC lecture came to be. Why a lecture? Why a lecture? Because Dad loved and enjoyed lectures as an art form and a means of communicating and educating. He enjoyed researching, writing, and delivering his lectures on literature, politics, and philosophy here and abroad. He lectured on Rizal, Mabini, Octavio Paz, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Thomas Aquinas. In Oxford and in UC Berkeley, this college dropout was referred to as Dr. Cristobal. Did he correct them? He was asked by a friend. I never challenged the invitation, he said. I just measured up. He also eagerly organized lecture series to honor other writers, such as the Nick Joaquin Lecture Series and the Plaridel Lectures. So we thought that a venue where public intellectuals are given the opportunity to think, write, and speak on any issue would be a suitable activity. And why not organize one in his name for a change? Now, what is a public intellectual? Well, at least for AEC lectures, the term has nothing to do with the initials P, H, and D after your name. That would be ironic. Though we have had eminent academicians and professors emeritus. We were privileged to have as lecturers, poets, philosophers, and a national artist for literature. But one's field of expertise need not be in literature or philosophy. Some of the themes of the lectures may sound esoteric, but we have listened to presentations on more worldly matters by an economist, former government officials, and a retired Supreme Court justice. In this series, we also listened to an investigative journalist giving us a blow-by-blow account on the burning issue of the day. Yet we were also enlightened by the deep and broad insights of one of our country's brilliant historians. So for the AEC lecture, there really is no fixed definition of a public intellectual. The term may be appropriate to refer, in Christopher Hitchens' description, quote, to men and women who do their own thinking, who are willing to stand the accusation of elitism, or at least prefer it to the idea of populism, who care for language above all and guess its subtle relationship to truth, and who are willing and able to nail a lie. Or we can also use a description more straightforward from another public intellectual, Edward Said. Someone able to speak the truth, a courageous and angry individual for whom no worldly power is too big and imposing to be criticized and pointedly taken to task. The real or true intellectual is therefore always an outsider, living in self-imposed exile and on the margins of society. He or she speaks to, as well as for, a public, necessarily in public, and is properly on the side of the dispossessed, the unrepresented, and the forgotten. I believe that description fits our guest lecturer today. On a final note, the Cristobal family partnered with Union ng Manunulat ng Pilipinas, not only to help sustain this lecture series and ensure its relevance to the next generation of Filipino writers, but also because UMPIL was close to our father's heart and to ours. He was one of its proud founders. For this partnership, the family thanks the officers and members of UMPIL. We also are very grateful to my sister Selena, literary executor of AEC, an active member and officer of UMPIL. She has been and is the driving force behind these lectures. There will be no such thing without her. Enjoy the lecture. Thank you and good day.
Maraming salamat Che, maraming salamat sa iyong napakagandang pagpapakilala at ilang pagninilay no hinggil sa AEC lectures. Banggitin ko lang ulit mga kaibigan no dahil umiinit na yung ating Facebook streaming with around 70 viewers no at this time. Mayroon po tayong book promo sa kagandang loob ng Anvil Publishing. 5 libro po ng ating tagapanayam ang ipamimigay. Bumati, magkomentaryo at magtanong lamang at magkaroon ng pagkakataong magwagi ng isa no, sa 5 libro ni Ninotchka, Rosca na ipinamimigay po ng UMPIL at ng Anvil Publishing. Maaari rin po kayong bumili ng mga aklat sa mga link ng Anvil Publishing na nasa caption ng ating streaming. Ngayon, tatawagin naman natin ang isa pang kasapi ng lupon at dating tagapangulo ng UMPIL, ang kasalukuyang direktor ng Ateneo de Manila University Press upang ipakilala ang ating tagapanaya, mga kaibigan. Palakpakan po natin si Binibining Karina Bulasco. Karina, magandang umaga.
Magandang umaga, LJ.
Yes.
Magandang umaga. Sorry, naguluhan itong... this introduction was lovingly written by a close friend of Ninochka. Stories, tales, and strange imaginings attended Ninochka Rosca as she grew up in the Philippines. Folk tales, clan tales, and tales from comic and literary books. She had taught herself to read in 2 languages at an early age, and while this earned her praise from the grown-ups, she was also told not to touch the books in the tall bookcases. As expected, she climbed to the topmost shelf and took down the fattest book of all, an English translation of Don Quixote by Miguel Cervantes, which would lead to her near rapture decades later when she spied on her first windmill in Holland while on a tour to promote her first novel, State of War, which had been translated into Dutch. The pattern of foreshadowing would attend her days, popping up seemingly by accident, but also seemingly preordained. Having written the Statement of Prisoners of Conscience under the aegis of Amnesty International for the United Nations 10th World Conference on Human Rights, she asked to be introduced to only one of the internationally renowned signatories to the statement. This request was, however, ignored, refused, and in a pick, she went to the AI's exhibit tent in the vast grounds of the palace. It started to rain shortly, and she recalled that the Dalai Lama was scheduled to give a lecture at an open amphitheater. Peeping out of the tent door, she saw 6 men in orange robes dashing through the rain toward the tent. And that was how she got what she had requested. And yes, she dried all off the Dalai Lama with paper towels. Being charmed comes with balancing hardships. Much of the latter came from her engagement in Philippine politics as an organizer, trainer, and writer of analysis and statements. She spent 6 months in prison under the Marcos dictatorship. had her career as a journalist truncated, and endured post-traumatic syndrome for over a decade. Her generation was cursed by that most subtle of Chinese curses, may you live in interesting times. Her awareness of politics was as much accidental as many seminal events in her life. As a freshman between classes at the University of the Philippines Diliman campus, she wandered to the second floor auditorium of the College of Arts and Sciences into a lecture on Vietnam by a Buddhist priest. Because she belonged to a generation that sought information and knowledge through reading, she read everything available at the university library, which was more like a second home to her. One summer, she had sworn to read every book in the literature section, so she wouldn't feel so stupid when professors dropped authors' names. She did it alphabetically and only stopped when she reached the letter L, and that makes her the only Filipina to have read Par Lagerkvist's novel, The Sibyl. Uh, Lagerkvist is a Swedish writer who won the Nobel Prize in 1951. She has a degree in English, major in comparative literature, finished her academics in Asian studies with a focus on Khmer civilization, and once contemplated doing her doctorate in literary theory in an Ivy League university. But academia was not part of what was preordained for her. She wrote, publishing 2 novels, 2 nonfiction books, innumerable short stories, nearly 1,000 journalism articles, countless political analysis and statements for various organizations. She traveled up and down the United States and Europe, was published in big, small, obscure periodicals, including having an interview translated into Farsi. She founded the first radical organization for Filipinas in the United States, went on to help create an experiment in women's trans-ethnic organizing. She remains active as a writer and as a member of a firm and heads its transnational committee. She has received numerous literary and journalism awards, which she ignores, but remains proud of the barriers she had broken, including writing the very first cover story for a mainstream US magazine, having a short story included in Raymond Carver's 100 Best Short Stories in the US the year it was published, and being in a fiction anthology with several Nobel laureates in literature. She's pleased to have been instrumental in making feminism a force among Filipina and Filipina Americans. Feminism of the serious kind, a full ideology, a social and political movement, a disruptor of both patriarchy and capitalism. Through all of this, she remembers the tales heard in her childhood of the elegant simplicity of the magic of her ancestral elementals. She hopes she has lived her life by the same magic. Friends, I'm honored to present our guest lecturer for this morning, Ninotchka Rosca.
Hi.
Go ahead, Ninochka.
Hi. Hello. Thank you for that introduction. The fellow who wrote it was a little shy and did not want to be acknowledged or was too frightened to be acknowledged. Magandang umaga po. It is a fortuitous thing that I can begin with this everyday phrase, which profoundly establishes our relationship with the Earth, the solar system, the universe, and most importantly, with time. We see the morning, we consider time itself to have aesthetic value, and we link the good feelings with the experience of beauty. it is so reminiscent of a prayer that I once heard from a Dine, a Native American. Can I share screen, please? I once heard from a Native American friend, and it is this: with beauty before me may I walk, with beauty behind me may I walk, with beauty above me may I walk, wish beauty below me may I walk, with wish beauty all around me may I walk. It is finished in beauty, it is finished in beauty. But I will start with a shout out, as we also have a greeting, that word of greeting, which we have turned into an expression of gratitude. Salam, salamat. I want to say congratulations to my two friends who are getting married in Cebu, Zainab and Kyle. And I thank Selena Cristobal and the Cristobal family for this space time to unravel some of the thoughts which have been bothering me through so many years. I thank UMPIL, Anvil, and all the other co-sponsors, and I would like to make special mention of the Mountain Club bookstore, which I have been planning to visit for so many years, but have not managed to do so. I thank all the persons and entities who are live streaming this talk. And I thank Jolie Garcia, who is in Australia. She made the portrait which was used for the announcement of this talk, as well as some of the images that I will use here. Finally, I thank Victor Velasco, who is in Florida, but who sent a webcam to make sure I did not look like a ghost in cyberspace, which until now has happened to be my digital look. Much as it is said that it takes a village to raise a child. It also takes a village to sustain a writer. So thank you, gracias, merci, etc. Sieseni, and salamat po. My subject for today is not about the infinity mirror, which is really a simple thing, but about patterns. The commonalities of our lives, the details which echo and re-echo through time and space, the sense of our fate. Now, the infinity mirror is a very simple thing, just two mirrors placed, facing each other and bouncing light rays back and forth to create the illusion of an infinite resonance of images and of dimensions. The best known contemporary practitioner of the use of the infinity mirror is, of course, the Japanese painter Yayoi Kusama, painter or installation artist. Here are some of her work, this one, and you can see this, the adumbration, the repetition of images through mirrors. And this one, yes, the spatter of color. Yeah, and then there is a very real, is it real? Sofa in the middle. We don't know if it's real or it's something taken from somewhere else, from some other, it's an image of something. And then this is her very famous mirror room, where you walk into a shower of colors. I do not know where Miss Kusama got her sense of pattern. Pattern recognition is a highly developed skill. Actually, William Gibson wrote a long novel on this pattern recognition, when you can recognize patterns in everyday objects. So, but this is a quotation from Miss Kusama in one of her interviews, where she said, "My mother told me I was not allowed to paint, that one day I have to marry someone from a rich family and become a housewife. When I was a girl, she took away all my inks and canvases. She's now 90 years old, and she has been doing this for all of her life." Now, my question is whether, when she heard this from her mother, she realized that this too was a pattern, a mode of existence for so many of us, and whether that realization created her sensitivity, repeated patterns, in the full knowledge of the truth that quite often, independent of our volition and our will, patterns rise and bend us to their own parameters, that life itself has its own patterns built in. Recurrent instances of joy, sadness, grief, anger, hunger, thirst, of getting married, having children, growing up, growing old. These are all patterns. Having reached this point in my thinking, I must confess that I understood a little bit the practice of deep meditation by Tibetan yogis, those who would lock themselves in caves far from everyone and everything, barely eating, and certainly with very minimal interaction with what we call society. They would stay there for decades. There was one British woman who was ordained, and she spent 12 years in a cave. Yes. This way, the refraction of the self, the warping of the image of the self in social interaction is broken. And one can look with intent inward into the clarity of one's being, into the self with a capital S, and not be deluded by the selves demanded by the world. Understanding patterns is essential to reaching truth. We have had 3 mirrors placed around us historically, separating us from our pre-dominion selves. A 4th right now is being constructed. Yes. Now, point of clarity. I have long used the phrase the dominion era, put together to, how would you call that, to compress the 3 periods of the occupation of the Philippines, commonly known as the Hispanic era, the American era, the Japanese era. We can heave a sigh of relief that these times of invasion and occupation seem to be getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Let us hope that the 4th one, now looming in the horizon, will last only for 1 more year. I used the phrase pre-Dominion or the Dominion era because I find it repugnant to anchor our sense of history, of our historical self, to an external force in our midst. Though that too is a pattern, as well as our response to it, active or negative, positive or passive. There is a secret, of course, to the infinity mirror. It is a scan. It is the profoundest of lies. Look at this image, and it seems like Charlie Chaplin is being echoed so many, many, many times in this, in this hall of mirrors, down to infinity. But the reality is, in physics, no mirror can reflect 100% of light rays, part of which pass through the mirror, or is absorbed by the mirrors, or lose their energy in the back and forth bouncing. Add to this the reality that at some point in this seemingly endless bouncing of light rays, the dimension of reflection becomes so very, 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 very small that even a photon of light cannot occupy it. So at the very heart of this seemingly endless repetition of images, of a pattern, at the very heart is a blank, a darkness. Oh, I should get some water. The mirror as metaphor. I first became fascinated with the mirror a long time ago, nung bata pa si Isabel, as we used to say, when I was scripting ABS-CBN, the television series Obra Maestra. I had to use another name because I was a practicing journalist at the time. It was directed by Nick Lisaso, who is now the head of the Commission on Culture and the Arts. I think, yeah, am I right? Yes, yes. He asked me to adapt a Nick Joaquin short story. We had already adapted Rashomon, we adapted, so on all these major works from all over the world. So he asked if I could do a Nick Joaquin. And being a very ordinary person, when left to my devices, I chose Guardia de Honor. I don't know how many of you remember this, but Guardia de Honor was a kind of difficult story, requiring rather interesting cinematography, which for those times, without the computer was still very difficult. This is where two women, one from the past, one from the present meeting her great-granddaughter, somewhere through the mirror. And so she looks through the mirror and both of them, they see the other. Okay. And then the woman from the future steps through the mirror into the past, which was also the present. I thought that we could use two big mirrors. Well, actually just one big mirror frame, and with the same frame without a mirror. So the actress could walk through it. And I was too imaginative. Nick Lisasos thought it was so difficult and postponed it. And because it was stillborn, it has remained with me all these years. The mirror resurfaces in my short story, Sugar and Salt. I think Anvil has an illustrated edition of that. illustrated by Ling Kisongbin. The mirror in this short story begins the process of conquest of a town when a conquistador offers a mirror to what would be a person called India. She looks into it and she accepts, and the town changes. The most famous mirror in Philippine literature is, of course, the one in May Day Eve. And much like the mirror in Sugar and Salt, it was a portal to a betrayal at the crossroads. I do not know how many else, how many other mirrors there are in Philippine literature. Yes. But we can be sure that the mirror did not begin as a metaphor for betrayal. Time was when there was a belief that a reflection was the soul of a person. Hence, we have heard of tribes refusing to allow their pictures taken, believing that their image can be stolen by whoever takes their, their soul could be stolen by whoever takes their image. The mirror used to be a portal of truth, as the one that Perseus held before the face of Medusa to reveal to her transmogrification caused by rape. It was a truth teller in Joaquin's The Woman Who Had Two Neighbors, when the young Connie at last stood nude before a mirror. And so that changed in Western art and literature as the mirror became a symbol of vanity and self-absorption. Look for that image. Yes, here we go. You must please bear with me because I have a new computer. My normal one broke down 2 days ago, and I had to run and get a new one. And I'm not used to this one yet. So you can see here, the mirror. Yeah. The mirror in the West, changing into a symbol of vanity and self-absorption, with Narcissus drowning in the contemplation of his own reflection. A portal into weirdness, as in the books of Lewis Carroll, one book in particular, Through the Looking Glass, which was an entry into a Freudian subconsciousness. By the time the Spaniards reached the Philippines, the mirror was a standard accessory of art and literature. It had two conflicting meanings. One as a symbol of vanity, of sin, etc., and the other as a divine eye, strangely enough, which holds the normal, the domestic scene of Earth in its stand. It is then curious that we in the Philippines do not have very many paintings of people with mirrors. Yes. What we have, on the other hand, is a presentation of men and women Oh, sorry. Let's skip to a presentation of this one, of men and women looking out from the flat surface of the painting, as if to find reflection in the eye of the beholder. Yes. This is very common in Philippine art. These are amor solos, yes, and we have these are men. They're all looking outside. Okay. I would not call this kind of conceit, and I don't use the word conceit as a bad thing. It's just a characteristic. I would not call this equivalent to the Western male gaze, where you have all these naked women displayed and looking for approval towards the beholder. But it does share that kind of longing for validation and vindication from the person who is beholding the painting. I would call it the colonial gaze. Interesting that our first images were done in this manner. Here, yes. So as you can see in the codex, it is somewhat like that. We are presented, we are object. Yes, yes. But how much this has influenced this very early representation, these very early images of ourselves, how much of this has really affected us in terms of our ideation and identity formation would be an interesting study. We are not, as a people, given to introspection and self-analysis like Japan or China or Indonesia. Instead, we pride ourselves on our resilience, malleability, and our adaptability. So, but what we must remember is that there are patterns even in our seemingly disparate expressions of ourselves. So there are common elements in this. So you see, these women, going back, what we see, there's very similar things, curvedness, softness, not too dark, yeah? Yes, and even when hard at work, there is the smile. And then, of course, in the scenery, there is the same common elements. Yes, coconut trees, nipa huts, people happy. Now, my question is, do these codex images, are they happy? How then do we define the appearance of virtue? How do we define it in terms of what is acceptable? Is to be acceptable a virtue? Do we define virtue through the eyes of the other? Looking at the most popular cultural genre, we find that the heroic is equated with what is considered strength in the Western context, whether in the male or the female. And I look at some of the comic books. I love comic books. I grew up reading comic books. So we have these images like this. Oh, this is advertising. We have these images, yeah. We have this. Yeah, this she's supposed to be Urduha, but you can see she's both extremely toned. Yes. And then you have this. Bernardo Carpio was a an old, supposedly an old heroic, mythical hero. And then you have him fully muscular. Yes. Okay. So these are, do we define ourselves by that, by what is deemed acceptable by others? This is a major question. And so when Victor sent me this picture of a work by Julie Lutalena, I was very surprised. Yes. This is now in the Singapore gallery. A shame. It should be in a Philippine gallery. This is entitled Woman Ruminating. And it goes back, it echoes, that scene in Nick Joaquin's The Woman Who Had Two Navels with Connie, when Connie goes into a room naked to look at herself in the mirror and to check whether she really had two navels. Very beautiful piece of work. Now, this then was my problem. Oh, I was looking for something that I could use that would not be in terms of what the others deemed acceptable. And so we have our very popular woman of power icon, yes, Dana. But as you can see, this is very disappointing. Yes, very disappointing. Why is she wearing a bra? Yes. This time, I was trying to tell the story of Machiline. And I found Darna. I returned to Darna. I grew up reading her in comic books, and came to the realization that Darna, our popular version of Wonder Woman, has to swallow a pebble to acquire her powers. Yes. Once the stone is expelled from her body, she reverts to being a child, a girl child, a vulnerable and ordinary girl. It is quite, so it's, the stone is quite literally a process of empowerment. Abilities which come from an external object, an external force, an external magic, This may explain the popularity of the tale of Darna, ang babaeng lumilipad. Her states of being reflect both our feelings about ourselves and our wishes for ourselves. She is a mirror, in this sense, a reflection of what is our true state of being and what is wished for. But we can only attain the power, we believe, through the agency of an element separate from our true child self. This then was my problem dealing when trying to write the story of Machiline. How to define her outside of the infinity mirror of the era of dominion, when a pattern of being had been forcibly imposed upon us and continues to be maintained. How to rescue our sense of self from the bouncing back and forth of light from elsewhere, not from ours, not from sources which are ours. How? What kind of power then would a being like Machiline possess? A power intrinsic to herself and to her surroundings. I refuse to call her Maria because she was not Maria. She was Machiline, personification of the mountain. Mountains are beings in our pre-dominion sense. They have souls. Machiline, for one, continues to haunt our collective unconscious. Ironically, in trying to define a creature of the past, I have to resort to a study of the creatures of the present, as strange, perhaps, as those of our myths and legends. And I am referring to overseas Filipino workers. Present in all the environs of the world, the phenomenon of our economic success. They are pivotal to the functioning of so many institutions, from engineering to construction, to seafaring, to healthcare, to the maintenance of the family itself. And yet they have to constantly fight for attention. Those of us who advocate for them have to constantly yell like a character in the death of a salesman. Attention must be paid. In April of last year, in the midst of a terrifying death rate among Filipino healthcare workers the world over, my organization and our team launched a website called Kanlungan. It's in kanlungan.net, which compiled all the data pertinent to this issue, the number of Filipino healthcare workers dying all over the world. And it's not only nurses and doctors, but the ambulance driver, the receptionist, the LPN, those who clean the beds and the corridors, etc. And we did this generally to break a silence, the silence which had been drawn over the dying of our people. And this was excused by so many unions and so many hospitals, as respecting privacy. What is private about dying from COVID when you're trying to take care of the people of another race and another nation? What is that mean? Am I over my time?
Go
Okay.
ahead.
2 weeks
Go
ago.
ahead.
Okay. 2 weeks ago, a member of a firm, Kanlungan, a member of our team, Jolene Levitt, and I did an interview for The Atlantic. They're going to podcast it. And I had the unfortunate task of articulating a truth about our state of being overseas, which mirrors our state of being in the Philippines. And it sounds so funny to be quoting myself, but I haven't heard anyone say this. We have to die to become visible. Because as soon as we launched Kanlungan, all the media came and started talking to us and started interviewing all of these healthcare workers in hospitals. And so in the Philippines, the poor have died by the tens of thousands in extrajudicial killings, their lives marked only by a violent end, duly reported in the media. Isn't that so sad? We have to die to become visible. This being the situation, it became almost a duty for me, an obligation, to turn this singular burden into power. And hence, when I was devising an image, a power for Machiline, I decided it would be stealth. her ability to go without notice in the world, without being noticed in the world. This is the singular superpower of Machiline. Now, okay. So how do I manage to do that? How do I manage to make her invisible? Truly, Garcia was so very nice to start drawing from my insane piecemeal writings about Machiline. So these were the first drawings she made of Machiline in the forest. Here, this is a scene where she's being chased by conquistadores, and here she is walking through a path, and we were not too happy with this, and so we decided to look around some more and looked at elements that we could use to dress her, to shape her, to make her real. So this is the description of Machiline, which I wrote: small, compact, wiry, burnt sienna brown with large eyes, a breathless nose, and lips which could flash as red as a flush coxcomb, with two tiny tattoos on the small toes of her feet, of leaves of a common vine. When called for, the tattoos would spark growth to cover her body all over, like a vine in a sudden rain, surrounding her in a pattern of silver and green in the moonlight, a pattern of gold and green in the sunlight. So it was impossible to discern her from the shadows of the night or from the searing colors of the day. She had no footfall. Her steps didn't bend the grass, nor her elbows break any twig. For any plant that blocked her way, carve away, sideways to ease her passage. And a makeshift cloth skirt and carried two machetes crisscross on her back. And she had 4 companions. Yes, all endangered species, if not extinct. The white tamarau. Where is that? The white tamarau, the flying lizard, the civet cat, and the giant golden-crowned flying fox. And these 4 are for strength, for cunning, for far-seeing, for speed and mobility, the virtues needed for her to survive in a rapidly changing environment. And Charlie came up with this. Yes, this. Just initial sketches with the Tamara, with her familiars. And this is her body with the tattoo. Yes. How very nice it is to be able to work with somebody who is in Australia while I'm in New York. But there is a caveat to this existence of the formidable Machiline. She lives her joys and her sorrows and battles our historical enemies solely in the mind of a 30-year-old woman who glides through her day unremarked in her exile as a servant to a family living in Manhattan. I will end here.
Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Ninochka. Siguro virtual na
Yes.
palakpakan, no? Ang ating dali lang ha. Okay, virtual na palakpakan ang ating ihahandog sa ating tagapanayam na si Binibining Ninotchka Rosca, no. So sa mga kaka-tune in lang, no, kakatapos lamang po ng panayam, no, ni Binibining Ninotchka Rosca at tungkol ito sa paghahanap, no, ng sarili, no, ng pambansang sarili sa panahong magulo at magalaw. At ito ay isang importanteng aspekto, no, na kailangan nating gawin ng paulit-ulit, no, at ginagawa ni Binibining Ninotchka Rosca bilang manunulat habang siya ay nasa kalayuan, no. So she's speaking from New York right now. That would be a very interesting thing to explore later, no. At makikita natin, no, doon sa kanyang panayam yung talagang proverbial na pagkapa muli, no, pagbakas at pagkapa muli, no, pabalik doon sa nakaraan, sa ating kaakuhan na binura ng panahon ng dominasyon na kanyang tinatawag na the Dominion era, no. Kasama po natin, no, sa open forum, no, na magpapalakad ng open forum ay si Binibining Silina Cristobal. Magandang umaga, Silina. Hindi ka pa namin na ipapakilala muli dito, na ipapakita sa screen. Good morning, Silina. Napakaganda, napaka-mystical, no, ng ating diskusyon, no. Bago tayo magtanong, no, babasahin ko yung ilang mga magagandang komentaryo na nakuha natin sa ating streaming commentary sa baba, no. So wag po kayo makakalimot kasi 5 sa inyo ang maaaring tumanggap ng mga aklat, no, ni Binibining Ninotchka Rosca mula sa Anvil, no. Ito, mula kay Ana May Evangelista, no, sabi niya, mirror as a symbol for vanity or a metaphor for betrayal. Sometimes if you look at the mirror, you admire yourself, and some other days you doubt your beauty. Indeed, it is really up to the eye of the beholder how he or she sees himself or herself, no. Okay. Ito gusto ko to, no. Hello ni Risa Balse, no. Maganda ito. Medyo patok itong ipinost mo na after the pandemic no one's wearing bras anymore. Totoo yan, no. Banda dinidiskusyon yung abangan niyo si Nirisa, no. Si Nirisa ay bahagi ng umpilan sa Abril, no. So makikita rin natin magsalita si Nirisa Balse, no, dito sa UMPIL. Okay, meron dito isa, no, mula kay Regine Aphrodite. It's sad that people that should be taking care of the frontliners remain deaf of their sentiments, but rich politicians that violated the quarantine protocols have not yet been given sanctions, and instead Filipinos are asked to display compassion, no? Mula kay Victor Barnuevo Velasco, we have to die to become visible, no. Ito yung kinote niya mula sa panayam ni Binibining Rosca. Mula kay since Kraba, no, ma-pronounce itong apelyido ito. We should not be blinded with the images presented by some mirrors. We must not follow what a mirror implies us to do. Rather, we must create our own mirror which could magnify who we really are, no? At same commentator since si Kraba, makiling is not Maria, no? Yung sinabi kanina ni Ninochka, because she is a woman of her own. She is different from the rest of Marias who chose to follow a mirror, no? Silina, ano yung mga natin, no? Mga initial na reaksyon o kaisipan na nakuha natin dito sa ating napakinggang panayam?
Oo, may nagtanong na sabi ni Miss Rosca, na do we define ourselves by what others find acceptable? Nagtatanong if Miss Rosca ever defined herself with one of the images that others find acceptable. Did she ever see an icon or an image that she related with? Baka Darna.
Baka yun din naisip
Hindi.
ko eh. Yun din ang
Hindi.
naisip ko. Baka si Darna.
Hindi.
O ikaw ra ba si Darna ni Ninochka?
I actually thought I would be like Somerset Maugham,
Oh.
who boarded a ship with a whole cargo of books and went all over the world and kept writing and writing. That's my dream in life, is to get on aboard the ship and go around the world. I will do it when the pandemic is over. No, pre-dominion yon. Pre-dominion. Yeah. Because we went by the boat, di ba?
Okay. Yung kanina napaka-importante kasing napaka-importanting punto doon sa diskusyon yung paggamit ng mga artworks, no, yung mga icons, no, na pinag-aralan ni Ninochka kanina. At nabanggit yung isang napakahalagang konsepto, no, yung konsepto ng titig, no, ng gaze, no. So namumuhay tayo ngayon sa isang napakagulong panahon kung kailan napakatindi ng diskriminasyon, no. At si Miss Rosca ay nasa Amerika ngayon, no, na ngayon ay binabagabag, no, ng napakatinding pagbabalik, no, ng diwa ng white supremacy. Itong paraan mo, Ninochka, no, ng pagbakas, no, sa ating indigeneity, no, sa ating pagkakatutubo. Paano ito nakakatulong sa iyo personally at sa iyo bilang manunulat, no, upang ma-subvert, no, yung oppressive gaze, no, ng discrimination, no, when it comes to race?
Well, I'm fortunate to live in New York City, which is probably the most liberal city in the United States. But also, nevertheless, things like that happen here, you know. As a matter of fact, one old Filipino was slashed in the face on the subway very recently. And that is indicative of how tense the race relations are in this country. Ever since, of course, the white supremacists got the courage to reveal themselves and to come out and march up and down the United States. How do I deal with that? Firstly, very firstly, I will not give an inch. Even with to Filipinos who say, you know, who abide by the idea that we should accept white power or white supremacy or integrate with an institution. I just got into a very long fight with a Pinoy policeman. Here's a policeman, New York Police Department, which we all hate in New York City because of its racism. Yeah, I was actually marching with Black Lives Matter, you know, even in the middle of the pandemic. So you don't give an inch. You don't say this is acceptable. No, not an inch. Not an inch. With any racism you encounter from any race whatsoever, even from Filipinos who are such misogynists, actually. Yes.
Yeah. Are you any hopeful because of the change of the change of leadership in in the United States? No, will it be able to, reverse, what has been put in place, no, by the previous administration, the previous American administration?
A little bit, at least, uh, it's not like every day you get brutalized by some issuance or some tweet from the former president of the United States. At least that kind of relentless battering, everyday battering, the unreasonable demands on people, unreasonable expectations of surrender and subservience. No, well, I'm not saying it's gonna change like radically or profoundly, but we have a breathing space. Change is what it can only happen if we make it happen. We as a people. It's not gonna come from leadership.
Yeah. All right. Let me just go back to some of our questions from Facebook. This is from Rodora Palomar Fresnedi. No? I think this is a reaction. I am struck by the thought about empowerment from quote-unquote external sources like Darna, Bato, OFWs. Maybe progress for us Filipinos should mean more introspection and finding power from within ourselves, inside our own country. No, that's a very good insight, I think. What's your reaction to that?
Well, we hardly ever use, I have hardly ever used the word empowerment because it's like, you don't give freedom or power to somebody. That person has to take it, has to make sure she has it and oppose anyone who is trying to take it from her. Yeah, I use the word liberation.
Liberation.
I'm an organizer for women. Yes, so we use women's liberation. We never use empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like empowerment within the liberal institutions. Yeah.
Yeah, no. Here's another one from Jojo Fresnedi. You mentioned that Filipinos are not given to introspection and reflection and has opted for resilience and adaptability. I agree. My experience tells me that resilience and adaptability is far deeper, meaningful, and purposeful with introspection and reflection. How can we induce more reflection among Filipinos?
That is a difficult question, actually, because along with being not introspective, we are also very proud. And we tend to resent any kind of criticism. No, we would immediately say, dami mong sinabi, nandiyan ka sa Amerika. How many times have I heard that? It's like, I'm looking at you from a distance and I can see the whole of you rather than being so near you that I can only see your nose. Yeah. But it's a fake pride. It's based on nothing. I mean, we shouldn't be. I don't know how we can break it, to break that very Filipino thing, where pride is not rooted in accomplishment, but pride is rooted in not losing face. There's a difference between the two. I don't know how to fix it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's very interesting is that right now, starting starting last month, we start the country's been talking about the 500 years of Christianization, essentially colonization of the Philippines, being marked in several cultural programs this year. And Christianity, of course, is a very strong ruminative, reflective, meditative tradition. No? Don't you think that an aspect of it, should also be, indigenized or localized, so that we would also evolve, some form of being reflective? Yeah.
I was just about to ask that it seems the predominant mirror that Filipinos use is because of religion. So their
Yeah.
mirror is the life of Christ or how close they can come to it. Although the
Mm.
danger there is that that mirror, that reflection is also appropriated wrongly. Like some people think they are Christ-like by being this, cleaning up.
Artist.
But
Well,
can
we had people who have only read the Old Testament.
okay.
And we stop
I
there.
get what you mean, yeah.
But it's really interesting to me. It has always been interesting to me how we as a nation, as a people, relate so strongly to a story which about Jewish people, a story that takes place in a desert where there's no water. Yeah, and we think of the fig tree. We've never seen a fig tree in our lives. I mean, totally. I was 15 years old when I started thinking about this and asking, what the hell do I have to do with it?
I remember that.
And then we started, yeah.
That's from years of reading the Diary of Anne Frank, which is required reading in all the schools, grades 6, 7. Instead of reading about the heroism of our own Japanese war or the martial law stories, that is still being required in
Really?
education. Yes, the Diary of Anne Frank.
Yeah.
So you don't wonder.
The universal virtue of
Pero maganda rin
sacrifice.
yung kasi ako iniisip ko rin parang syempre may folk Catholicism naman no? May mga tao nung January may community quarantine, punta pa rin doon sa Quiapo, 'di ba? No? So iniisip ko parang somehow meron ding mga bagay na indigenize, na nagtutulak sa atin na magnilay, pagnilay at tignan ng ating mga sarili, meron ditong pinadala sa akin mula sa Facebook Messenger mula kay Ginoong Professor Jomar Cuartero ng Ateneo de Manila University. This is what he said. Hi Jomar daw, Fascinating lecture as always. I noticed that you have been talking about time, particles, energy, and even light through mirrors, but you always foreground these concepts in our colonial history. What brought you to this integration of physics, with history and cultural politics? Could you share with us the story behind this direction of your theorizing of this world, of the world? Why is it also important to look at the world from this frame?
Well, how can I say? There are two explanations for it. One is like rooted in my childhood. I wanted to be a physicist. But that was most unusual for a woman in my time. Besides, there was, I think, only 4 people who were physicists in the Philippines, and none of them had money. So that was out of the consideration. That was the first. The idea of stability in my family was, being part of an institution, and to be a physicist and be part of an institution requires a huge research department, something like that, an observatory and things like impossible. That was the first reason. The second reason is that, from the first reason, physics has always been an abiding interest for me. When I'm very distressed and overwhelmed, I will read a physics book, because it takes me away from everything that is happening in this world. It's almost pure knowledge, really. I just ordered a copy of Penrose's The Road to Reality, and that segues to my next reason. We are living in a time where, which is so, how would you call it? So postmodernist, where everything is relative. Everything depends on the person who is observing or speaking or evaluating. There is the common measures that we use to gauge reality. All of these are being broken down. Yes. We just very recently got the shock of our lives, because the former president of the National Lawyers Guild in the United States, which is a left-wing, very progressive institution, turned out to have been faking her racial identity.
Faking.
sa panahon ng fake, di ba?
I know, and this is so horrible. This is like, oh my God, because there are very little positions for people who are not white. So for you to occupy a position that is meant for a person who is not white, and you are white,
Yeah.
they don't seem to realize this. There are innumerable instances of people claiming to be American Indians because there is support for American Indians, artists, etc. And there is, we're living in a very postmodernist world where self-definition is the standard.
Okay. So, siguro huli na lang ito si Lina, no? Unless may tanong pa tayo. May mga tanong pa ba tayo mula sa ating Zoom gallery? Karina, please. Go ahead. Karina, I think you need to...
I was suggesting we share the comment of Manda Giam from Facebook, where she says, I think we can't reflect much when we're so busy making ends meet and helping ourselves, keeping ourselves alive. That self-reflection is a kind of a luxury. It's something for people who don't have to struggle.
This is what one of my yogi friends said when I was very, very busy, very busy. And you cannot imagine how busy I can be when I'm busy. Yes. When you are busy, take 10 minutes to stop and meditate and think about what you're doing. 10 minutes. If you are very, very, very busy, take an hour.
Oh, that's something.
We must make time to know ourselves. Otherwise, we're going to be busy forever. And it will be busy for the sake of busyness,
True. Yeah. There's another comment from Bernie Cervantes regarding what we were talking about earlier. Isn't folk Catholicism part of the pakitang tao that Filipinos do to see how religious he is?
Well, that's part of it, and it's really a tradition in the Catholic Church in the Philippines where you had to donate so much, or be the head of all of these festivals. You have to have money. But that's not limited to the church, to the government. The same thing here in New York, for instance. we had Philippine Independence Day, and the theme was honoring our overseas Filipino workers. And yet the marshal, there was not a single marshal who was an overseas worker. They were all like, the owners of the whatever. They were all business owners.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess that closes our open forum, no. Ngayon po mga kaibigan, no, tatawagin ko pong muli, no. Andito naman si Silina Cristobal, no, bilang kinatawan ng pamilya Cristobal, no, ang pamilya ng ating tagapangulong tagapagtatag upang pasalamatan, no, ang ating ang ating tagapanayam para sa taong ito, si Binibining Ninochka Rosca. Silina?
Yes. Thank you, Ninochka. But I believe Mike Crosa is giving our closing remarks, but we'd like to thank you from the bottom of our hearts, me, my mother, my siblings, and my father, of course. He's probably laughing his head off up in wherever he is. Especially your story yesterday about him being in the audience during your book launch.
That was terrible. May I tell that story?
Yes, please. We would like stories.
The State of War had just come out, and I was on book tour in California. I was speaking at this fancy bookstore in Berkeley, and there were about 100 people there. I did not realize Adrian had arrived and was in the audience. And so during the question and answer, after I had done my reading, there was question and answer. And somebody asked, what happened to the writer? What about those writers supporting the government? And this was Marcos' time, yes? And so I said, oh, they had very excellent writers like Adrian Cristobal, Kerima Pulotan. I didn't know he was in the audience. And then I followed it up in saying, they were really good. I don't know why they stopped writing when they joined the government. And then I finished, I signed the books, I stepped down from the stage, and bulagad, there was Adrian. Oh. And he said, you're right. I will try to save $100,000 and I will write a book too. I will write a novel.
And then he invited you, I think.
He took me out for dinner. I left everybody. I left my escort. I left my fans, a huge number of people waiting. And he said, I will take you home. I have a car. Okay, we'll go. We had dinner, we had drinks, we talk about this, about that. And I think that was the grief of his life.
Of not being to write creatively.
Yes. Yes.
He let it out. Thank goodness he let it out in one of his books. He liked writing for the Old Observer, Pasquinades, because that's where he could write creatively. He would imagine characters, and he had a ongoing weekly conversation with this character. It's too bad. And he put it in a book.
Yeah.
So,
but he wanted to return to literary writing, really. And that was, I think, the main grief of his life. And no matter how, people thought, Adrian has so much money, blah, 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 he was still sad.
Yeah. No, it's our fault. We were 6 children. So he had to look after 6 children.
Okay. So, mga kaibigan, no,
wala na bang censurable stories?
Pero pa
wala na ibang o tayo na lang dalawa.
My lips are mum.
Tayo na lang dalawa.
Naging show, naging showbiz talk show. The literary chismis where you find here in Facebook. Okay, so mga kaibigan, no, maraming salamat po sa inyong pakikinig, no? At sa totoo lang, no, kapag ka nagsimula na ho ang ang aming mga gawain sa isang taon sa pamamagitan ng Adrian Cristóbal Lectures, no. Ito na po ay kick off, no, noong serie ng mga gawain na gagawin po ng UMPIL hanggang Abril, no, dahil po sa Abril ay pinagdiriwang po natin ang pambansang buwan ng panitikan, kung saan pinagdiriwang po natin ang 500 taong pagsulat sa kaakuhang Filipino, no, in line with the centenary of Christianization, no, in the Philippines, no. So gusto ko lamang banggitin, no, yung sa Abril, ano po yung mga aabangan natin sa Abril? Nandyan po sa aming header sa Facebook, no, meron po tayong umpilan sa Facebook Live, online pa rin po ang ating mga activities sa Abril. 7, 10, 17 at 24. 7, 10, 17, 24. At ang araw ng Gawad, Balagtas, Benitez at Bukanik sa Facebook Live sa April 30 po, no? Gusto rin po naming gamitin ang pagkakataong ito, no, para ipahayag ang aming pong pakikiramay sa mga naulila, no, ng isang dakilang manunulat at feminista, isa pong tumanggap ng Gawad Pambansang Alagad di Balagtas, si Dr. Lilia Quindosa Santiago. Sa kanya pong pamilya, no, nakikiramay po ang Unyon ng mga Manunulat sa Pilipinas at sumasaludo po kami kay LQS. No? So, other than that, no, yung pong mananalo, no, ng 5 libro mula sa Anvil, no, abangan niyo lang po ang announcement namin. Ipopost po namin bukas, no, sa Facebook, at kayo po ay aming kokontakin para po mapag-usapan, no, kung paano ang inyong pagpapadeliver, no, ng libro, no, kasi ang libro ay kailangan po ninyong bayaran ang delivery fees, no. So bago ko tawagin, no, yung ating pong tagapangulo, no, sasalamatan ko lamang ulit yung ating sponsors, no. Ang hirap, si Lina, kailangan natin pasalamatan ng sponsors. Okay, so maraming salamat po sa panitikan.com.ph, sa UP Likhaan, maraming salamat. Savage Mind Bookshop, Mount Cloud Bookshop, Squeeze.ph, thank you so much. Linangan sa Imahan, Rhetoric at Anyo, Librong Lirat, Sawikaan Filipinas Institute of Translation. I think we have also been streamed in the Virgilio Almario Facebook page. So maraming salamat po kay Sir Rio. At sa Anvil, syempre, no, sa pagsuporta sa ating programa. Upang pong isara, no, ang ating...
Can I thank lang
Yes, go ahead.
on our UMPIL page, this lecture was streamed 50 times on 50 different spots, not just our sponsors. Yeah, I would like to thank whoever they are. Yes.
Yes, maraming salamat po, no, napakalaki po ng reach natin ngayong taon, no. Actually, nako, Selena, di ba, if you remember, last year, no, we had the full house crowd at the Leong Hall.
In Ateneo, yes.
Manila University when we featured retired Supreme Court Justice Antonio Carpio, no, who is himself an acting Chief Justice during his time. So mga kaibigan, no, para po sa ating bating pasasalamat, no, ibig ko pong tawagin si Dr. Mike Corosa, ang tagapangulo, kasalukuyang tagapangulo ng Unyon ng mga Manunulat sa Pilipinas. Sir Mike?
Magandang umaga po. Good morning, Manila. Good evening, New York. My task today is to deliver a closing remarks, but I just couldn't help sharing a poem that I wrote 2 decades ago to be able to relate to what Ninochka Rosca just shared with us. I hope you won't mind. So parang ito na ang aking gagawing closing remarks. Well, the title of this poem is Pagharap sa Salamin.
Wow!
Maaga tayong tinuruang humarap sa salamin upang maging bulaklak sa mata ng bawat makakadaot palad. Inaayos natin ang ating sarili nang ayon sa panlasa ng nakararami, pagkat ito ang aral ng lahat ng ina, nagbasa man o hindi ng Urbana at Felisa. Pag kinakati tayong ayusan ng sarili sang-ayon sa ating hilig at diskarte, halimbawa'y lagyan ng hikaw ang ilong, palawitan ng tenga ng upo o talong, tulad ng ating ina ng mga tsismosa, ng guro, ng pulis, ng pastor o kura, ang ulirang salamin ay napapamura. Inuulit-ulit ang sinapit ni Narciso na umibig, nagnasa sa sariling anino, ikinukubli ang lamat ng pagsisinungaling sa tuwinang siya ay ating haharapin. May nabubunyag nga sa tulong ng liwanag, ngunit hindi sarili ang nakakaharap. Sadyang salamin lamang ang ating minamalas.
Ang ganda! Ang ganda, Mike.
Di ba?
Beautiful.
What a way not to end our lecture. May poetry reading pa.
Kaya po mga kaibigan, nagpapasalamat po ang Union ng mga Manunulat sa Pilipinas at sa ngalan po ng lahat ng bumubuo sa Kalupunan Board ng UMPIL at ng lahat ng kasapian, buong kasapian ng Union ng mga Manunulat at sa ngalan din po at pasasalamat sa pamilya Cristobal sa patuloy na pagtataguyod natin, ang magkatuwang na pagtataguyod natin ng lecture series na ito. Nagpapasalamat po kami kay Ninochka Rosca na sa tingin ko po, sa palagay ko po, na antig tayong lahat upang pagmunian ang higit na mataos na pagkilala natin sa ating mga sarili, mayroon man o walang salamin, upang higit nating makita ang tunay na magaling. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Mike. Yeah.
Maraming salamat po, Doc Mike. No, maraming salamat at maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat, no, na nakibahagi, no, sa halos magdadalawang oras ng programa palatuntunan ito. Simula pa lamang ito ng mga gawain ng UMPIL na tatagal hanggang Abril, no. Abangan po ninyo ang mga umpilan sa Facebook Live at ang Araw ng Gawad, Balagtas, Benitez at Bukaneg sa katapusan ng Abril, no. So para po sa mga nasa Zoom gallery na magkakaroon po tayo ng maikling class picture, ipopost din po namin ito, no? At yung pong mga nag-aabang, no, ng ng mga premyo natin, bukas po ito ipapaskil, kayo po ay aming pong imimensahe sa inyong Facebook Messenger. So magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat at hanggang sa muli sa susunod na Adrian E. Cristobal Lecture sa isang taon. No? Hindi natin alam kung online pa rin pero mukhang maganda ang online format. Okay, magandang umaga po at hanggang sa muli.
Bye-bye. Okay. Carl, class picture na tayo.
Okay, I'm done.